I think the term dream match is massively overused in wrestling. Promoters, wrestlers and fans alike use it constantly. But for me, real dream matches, ones that feel almost too good to be true, only come along once every few years, if we're lucky. Very few dream matches ever come to fruition, and even fewer actually live up to expectations. In 2022, after a months-long war of words online, two of the greatest tag teams in the world collided 3 times, in what I consider the greatest tag team trilogy of the century, and possibly of all time. Each match is a veritable love letter to professional wrestling, and in this episode of WrestleLore, I'll be going in depth on this year-long feud, the 3 epic wars these teams fought, and the greater meaning this rivalry has taken on after the tragic and untimely passing of one of the greatest and most compelling wrestlers of the last 20 years. FTR versus the Briscoes. When I think about the best tag teams of the last 25 years, for me the conversation begins and ends with the Briscoes. Mark and Jay have been part of Ring of Honor since the very beginning, an 18-year-old Jay Briscoe competing on the very first Ring of Honor show, with a 17-year-old Mark Briscoe in his corner, too young to legally compete in Philadelphia. After a brief feud, the Briscoes would become synonymous with tag team wrestling in the promotion over the next 20 years. They would have matches and feuds with practically every great team that worked in the promotion. Steen and Generico, the Kings of Wrestling, the American Wolves, the Age of the Fall, and the world's greatest tag team, to name just a handful, becoming 11-time tag team champions in the promotion. The look and wrestling style of the team would change over the years, but their intensity would never wane. They would work for other independent promotions as well as competing in Japan, for Noah in the mid-2000s and New Japan in the mid-2010s, but as far as many were concerned, myself included, the Briscoes were Ring of Honor tag team wrestling. FTR's story was very different. After wrestling on the independent scene as individuals in the Carolinas and Georgia respectively, the two would end up in NXT. After treading water for some time, under the tutelage and mentorship of the late great Dusty Rhodes, the two would form a tag team. They weren't an overnight sensation, but it quickly became apparent this team had something about them. A throwback to Southern style tag wrestling, and heavily inspired by Tully and Arn and the Condrey Eaton Midnight Express, the team provided a great contrast to NXT's tag division, and the wider tag team wrestling world at the time as a whole. They would have acclaimed matches with American Alpha and DIY, before being called up to the main roster. With tag team wrestling traditionally overlooked in the WWE, the team floundered, and were saddled with some less than stellar creative before departing the company and signing with AEW. They would adopt new names in tribute to Demolition, their new tag name referencing a long-running gag from the Being the Elite YouTube series. FTR has been alleged to stand for many things, the most official, unofficial answer being the one I think represents the team best: the rest. They became pillars of AEW's tag division, having a long-awaited match against the Young Bucks, becoming multiple-time AEW tag team champions, and going on to hold the IWGP and AAAR tag titles as well. Our story begins in August 2021 on a chicken farm in Sandy Fork, Delaware, with a statement of intent from the Briscoes. In the lead up to a pair of Ring of Honor shows in the former ECW arena, the Briscoes spoke about going to an ECW show there and realising that wrestling is what they were meant to do. Fast forward 2 decades, they proclaim themselves the kings of tag team wrestling, alluding to teams in AEW and WWE as being clowns and pretenders to their throne, daring any team to show up. None did, with the Briscoes suffering a loss against the OGK at Death Before Dishonor, a setback on their road to a potential 12th Ring of Honor tag title reign. Over the next few months, the Briscoes would go undefeated both in Ring of Honor and on the independent scene. At this time though, a war of words is beginning online between Jay Briscoe and Dax Harwood. A fan would reply to the Briscoes video, tagging FTR and saying that the Briscoes were calling them out. Dax would emphatically reply, "No, they're not," beginning a heated back and forth on Twitter with the elder Briscoe that would continue for several months, before coming to a head at Final Battle 2021. In the semi-main event, the Briscoes would defeat the OGK, claim the Ring of Honor tag titles for the 12th time, before calling out any and all tag teams around the world to step up. The lights would go out, and FTR would appear on the apron to stare down the Briscoes. The teams would begin to brawl until security intervened, though this wouldn't stop them, as they continued to fight on the outside before finally being separated. The war of words on Twitter would continue, with the Briscoes releasing a number of video promos from Sandy Fork. I highly recommend you seek these out on Jay Briscoe's Twitter account, as it's not possible for me to do them justice. In summary, the Briscoes put FTR on blast for attacking them after their match with the Kingdom, inviting them to park a private jet in their cornfield to come fight them, and that they were hiding behind Tony Khan, knowing that the Briscoes would not be allowed on AEW programming. FTR would respond with a video of their own, alluding to them as being amateurs, inviting them to AEW, and declaring that the Briscoes had never faced a team like them before. This back and forth would continue, building anticipation until finally it would be announced that the Briscoes and reigning AAA Tag Champions FTR would meet for the first time ever at Supercard of Honor 2022, in a match for the Ring of Honor World Tag Team Championships. It's been half a year since the last Ring of Honor show, where FTR and the Briscoes met in the ring, and FTR out first, looking incredibly confident and wearing the AAA tag titles. The Briscoes are hugely amped up when they enter, staring daggers at Dax and Cash before getting right in the faces of both men. Both sides get great reactions when they're introduced in the ring, immediately ending up nose to nose once again. A loud holy chant breaks out before the bell rings, and the code of honour is not adhered to, with FTR turning their backs on the Briscoes rather than shaking hands. Mark and Cash opt to start the match for their teams, amidst raucous dueling chants from the fans in Texas. They begin with some very pointed chain wrestling, appearing to be very evenly matched. Mark manages to get the advantage with a bit of redneck kung fu, before making the tag to Jay, but Wheeler escapes the wrist lock and retreats to his corner. The tag is made to Dax, and the two men throw in the most vicious and pointed attacks in their online feud, and now the legal men here. You'd be forgiven for expecting these two to be trading strikes here, but as Riccaboni and Caprice say on commentary, this rivalry is about who the best wrestlers are, so naturally that's the domain both men seek to assert themselves in, leading to an intense collar and elbow tie-up. The Den Boys' top guys chants return as they lock up once more, and Jay and Dax are as well matched as their partners were. Things get more heated when Dax escapes the leg scissors, deciding to spit in Jay's face before leaving the ring. His smug, satisfied face clearly shows his disrespect of the Briscoes, and I'd argue by extension Ring of Honor is by design, hoping to provoke the hot-headed Jay into making a mistake that will cost his team. When he returns to the ring, some stiff shots give him the advantage, but Jay keeps his cool and bides his time, getting the better of Dax and setting him to the outside of a clothesline. Dax tries to re-enter the ring twice, both times being thwarted by Jay, which causes Dax to lose his cool. He grabs a chair in frustration and hurls it into the ring, though it's caught smoothly by referee Paul Turner, who shakes his finger no. Jay claims the chair, but it's confiscated by Turner, before Dax finally makes his way into the ring, catching Jay and making the tag to Cash. Wheeler lands some stiff shots before Jay manages to turn the tables, and he makes the tag to his brother. Mark rocks Cash with some big shots, but a huge uppercut stuns him. FTR use the referee's 5 count very efficiently, swarming Mark with a barrage of strikes. The match had been intense and heated from the beginning, and the hateful striking that occurs from this moment on only hammers that point home. Harwood and Briscoe trade vicious chops, Mark seeming to get the better of it, until Dax feints a chop, landing a strong right hand instead. He immediately tags Cash back in, his right hand showing signs of damage after that shot. The Briscoes reassert themselves here beautifully, working as one in the way only a team with decades of experience can, isolating Cash in their corner right after. Mark lands some more nasty strikes, including a chop so vicious Jay has to walk away for a second. Some more flawless Briscoes synergy follows, as they work to send FTR to the outside, with Jay wiping both men out of a tope, and Mark following up with a cactus elbow. When FTR recover, the two teams begin to brawl on the outside. The match begins to more closely resemble what many fans had expected to see. Dax and Cash get the better of the Briscoes, driving Jay into a table with a slingshot. Dax smells blood, literally and figuratively, and immediately goes to work targeting the wound. He re-injures his right hand in the process though, and fishhooks Jay in the ropes, leaving him open to a blindside shot from Cash. Dax continues to grind down Briscoe, eventually depositing Jay on the top rope. He manages to send Dax to the mat with a headbutt, but cannot capitalise in time, allowing Dax to recover and land a massive superplex. He manages to make the tag to Cash, who cuts off the ring and forces Jay towards his corner. Dax taunts Jay in the ropes, and despite their less than honourable tactics thus far, half the crowd are still behind FTR as the dueling chants return. Jay begins to fight out of the corner, swinging at Cash and Dax before avoiding a clothesline and finally making the tag to Mark. He comes out swinging with redneck kung fu for both his opponents, getting the better of FTR and landing the iconoclasm on Dax for 2. Dax avoids the Death Valley driver and attempts to spike pile driver, but Mark manages to fight out of it, sending Dax into the ring post. Jay clocks Cash, and the Briscoes land the redneck boogie for 2. They work over Cash in the corner, though he's able to send Mark to the outside and sets up a powerbomb. Dax makes a blind tag, with Cash popping Jay onto his shoulders, and then land a slingshot powerbomb variation of the powerplex. Though Jay is able to survive, much to Dax's frustration. We see the consequence of him connecting with the ring post earlier, as blood is beginning to trickle down his face as he processes Jay's resilience. FTR's Shatter Machine attempt is countered before the Briscoes land it themselves, but it's not enough to put FTR away. Cash drags Jay out of the ring, prompting Mark to respond with a nasty boot to the back of his head. Cash drills him with a monstrous DDT before Jay gives him a receipt, a thudding Death Valley driver onto the floor. Dax has had time to recover and tries to bring Jay back into the ring with a suplex. The pair fight over the hold, but it's Jay who wins out, suplexing Dax over the top rope and onto the floor as the crowd explodes. The 4 men take a long time to recover, and we can see that Mark has been opened up by that DDT. The Briscoes make it back into the ring at a count of 4, and Cash lifts Dax into the ring to break the count at 7. Both teams, exhausted by the intensity of the match up to this point, struggle to make their way to their feet. They begin to trade huge shots, FTR appearing to get the better of the Briscoes until Mark sends Cash careening to the floor. Mark's corkscrew senton wipes out Wheeler, leaving the elder members of each team, the 2 whose egos and war of words led to this match in the first place, alone in the ring. Dax and Jay trade huge elbows back and forth, over and over, until both men are on their knees. They continue to throw again and again as they return to their feet amidst a chorus of Briscoes and FTR chants. Jay gets the better of Dax, a rolling elbow and neckbreaker finally putting him down, allowing Mark to land the froggy bow, but it's still not enough to put the axe away. Jay is slow to recover, wheeled on by Mark, who is signalling for the Doomsday device. Jay eventually manages to get Dax in position, but Cash's interference gives Dax the opening to avoid the clothesline. FTR pitch Jay to the floor and drill Mark with the Shatter Machine to get the 3 count and claim the Ring of Honor World Tag Team Championships in their first match in the promotion. It's former Ring of Honor owner and ambassador for the promotion, Carrie Silkin, who presents the championships to FTR, and in a surprisingly respectful move, given the intensity of the rivalry before the match took place and FTR's actions during it, Dax and Cash lay the belts at the feet of the Briscoes and bow. The 2 teams shake hands as the fans chant ROH, and FTR leave the Briscoes to enjoy the adulation of the fans. In a shocking turn, a team with a storied history of all 4 men would make their Ring of Honor return, as the Young Bucks would lay out both Briscoes with super kicks, and would nail Jay with the BTE trigger. They'd attempt to hit Mark with the Meltzer driver, though FTR would rush back to make the save, a precursor to their match with the Young Bucks, scheduled for the next episode of Dynamite. I think this is a tremendous match. Given the calibre of the teams involved here, that's not altogether surprising, but I was taken aback by just how great the chemistry between the Briscoes and FTR is here. It's like they're long-time rivals who've met in the ring dozens of times before, when in fact it's their first ever encounter, one that somehow managed to exceed its lofty expectations. I love that it's FTR, who are generally portrayed as a tough but cerebral and focused tag team that are the ones rattled by the Briscoes, who are often considered more wild and hot-tempered wrestlers. It plays into the story they were beginning to tell in their back and forth online really nicely. The FTR saw the Briscoes as being minor leagues in comparison to them, underestimating their technical ability and not quite believing the hype around them. When they finally met in the ring, this came back to bite them, with the Briscoes working extremely well to cut off the ring and isolate members of FTR for long stretches. I'm probably going to end up mentioning this a few times in this episode, so apologies in advance, but I've always thought that FTR have been woefully miscast as a babyface team in AEW. While they do get a lot of positive reactions, unsurprising given their status and the dream match they have found themselves in, they've slotted themselves very nicely into the role of arrogant, disrespectful, and at times aggressive tweeners, showing plenty of unsportsmanlike conduct throughout, without veering into full heel territory. As for Mark and Jay, they put on a fantastic showing here. I'd love to hear the thoughts of someone whose first exposure to the Briscoes was this match, because as someone who knew their work very well already, I think they did a terrific job showing what makes them such a great tag team. Their speed, athleticism and synergy are obvious, and the way they frustrate and out-wrestle FTR at some key moments in the first half gives them a lot of credibility for first-time viewers. The Briscoes are such a great tag team, being so technically sound and so well polished, while having that air of gritty realism and edge makes almost every match of theirs a must-watch. Everything they do here is perfectly placed and perfectly timed, and you feel the resentment they have towards FTR, a more well-known and popular, yet less travelled and experienced tag team that looks down on them. The intensity and brutality of this match really cannot be overstated, and works as a harbinger of what's still to come. FTR slingshotting Jay into the table, and Dax targeting Jay's head wound shortly after, and we can't forget the brutal suplex from the apron to the floor. There's nothing groundbreaking or hyper-violent here, but everything is delivered with the intensity and edge and hate this match deserves, and it all ties together wonderfully. What I find most impressive about this match is that it is somehow completely satisfying, yet paradoxically leaves you wanting more. Saying it out loud, it really sounds ridiculous, but I stand by it. The match itself, for what it is, and for what it needed to be, it's perfect. The first encounter between the two teams probably should hold some things back, as if it didn't, there'd be nowhere to go from that point onwards. And when I watched it the first time, I was very excited about the prospect of a second match between the two teams. I think it's a really impressive feat, to perfectly set up a potential rematch, without the fans feeling they've been shortchanged. The titles are on the line, and they do change hands, but really this match is all about respect. And while there may not have been much, if any, before, after a heated 30-minute battle, I think that mutual respect is undeniable. It works as a single, standalone match, and the first chapter of a larger story. And going back to watch this again was a real treat. Ring of Honor will return for Death Before Dishonor 3 months later, with a mix of Ring of Honor and AEW signed wrestlers scheduled to compete. In the meantime, FTR would pick up the IWGP tag titles by defeating the United Empire and Roppongi Vice at Forbidden Door. The top guy is now holding 3 sets of tag team titles. 2 weeks before the show, they would throw out a challenge on Dynamite for the rematch, which the Briscoes would accept. The week before the show, Ring of Honor commentator Caprice Coleman would moderate a sit-down interview between the two teams. Though it would begin respectfully, the Briscoes described their previous loss as a lucky punch, and criticised FTR as not being able to match the commitment of the Briscoes in regards to their schedule. As a way of removing all doubt as to the previous match not being a fluke, FTR would offer to make the match 2 out of 3 falls, which the Briscoes would happily accept. The conversation would get even more heated, with the Briscoes pouring FTR's peace offering on the floor, and the 4 men almost coming to blows. With the respect formed at the end of the last match appearing to be ancient history, we roll on to the main event of Death Before Dishonor, FTR vs the Briscoes 2 out of 3 falls. Both teams are fired up as they make their entrances, FTR being subdued only by the sheer weight of all the gold they're carrying. Once again, the code of honour is not observed, the two teams nose to nose amidst duelling Briscoes FTR chants. Mark and Dax start for their teams, and once again it's an intense collar and elbow that opens the match. The two sides are even in the opening skirmishes, chain wrestling to stalemates and trading big shoulder tackles, until it's Jay who gets the first significant offensive moment, a huge back suplex that gets 2. Dax rolls to the outside and is checked on by Doc Sampson, favouring his left shoulder. Cash and Jay trade some huge chops until Cash goes low and lands a back suplex of his own, followed by Dax knocking Mark off the apron, leaving the Briscoes to regroup on the outside this time. FTR managed to take control inside the ring, using some quick tags and short offensive flurries to keep Jay isolated. The Briscoes respond with some quick offense of their own, and Mark lands a cheap shot on Cash behind the referee's back. The Briscoes dominate Cash for the best part of 5 minutes, keeping him far from his own corner and using quick strikes and submissions to grind him down. A huge power slam counter creates an opening, allowing Cash to finally make the tag to Dax. He brings the heat with a flurry of right hands and chops for both Briscoes, as well as a pair of German suplexes for Jay. The Briscoes work together to send Dax to the outside, and Mark calls for the cactus elbow. He's intercepted by Cash, who takes his head off with a monstrous lariat on the apron. In the ring, Dax gets caught with a super kick, but he avoids the J Driller and hits a nasty DDT for 2. He tries for a J Driller of his own, but gets countered and slingshotted into the corner. Mark recovers and helps Jay get Dax onto his shoulders, before they turn him inside out with a Doomsday device, and despite Cash's efforts, the Briscoes claim the first fall. A small package almost evens the score right away, but Jay kicks out in time before sending Dax to the outside. Mark connects with a series of nasty chops that drop Harwood, and sends him back into the ring. The Briscoes work methodically, Jay sending Dax back outside, his chest now bleeding, and Mark attacking Cash. Dax's bleeding chest becomes the target of Jay's wrath, as he chops him across the ring, before making the tag to Mark. He grinds down Dax with a tight chin lock, preventing him from making the tag to Cash, until Dax powers out to it with a suplex. Both men crawl to their respective partner, but it's Mark who makes it first, Jay boots Cash off the apron before Dax can make attack, but gets caught with a pair of German suplexes and is positioned on the top rope. Dax drops Mark when he tries to intervene, before landing a huge superplex that leaves both men stunned. Dax crawls to his corner once again, but Mark appears out of nowhere at the last possible second to yank Cash off the apron. The Briscoes return Dax to their corner, connecting with the redneck boogie for 2. Mark reapplies the chin lock, controlling Dax with suffocating pressure, though Dax begins to fight out of it once more. Mark and Dax trade massive chops, until Dax avoids Mark's attack and finally makes the tag to Cash. Cash has always had a great hot tag, incredibly intense and fiery as he takes out both Briscoes with some huge strikes, before drilling Mark with a brainbuster for a close 2 count. Mark briefly rallies and tries for the redneck boogie again, but Dax restrains Jay, allowing Cash to hit a gory bomb for another close 2 count. The match breaks down, as Jay and Dax trade strikes over the barricade, before heading deeper into the crowd. At the same time, Mark and Cash are causing chaos ringside, having uncovered and shifted a table towards the ring, before Cash's diving crossbody gets 2. Jay brains Cash with the ring bell behind the back of the referee, but he somehow manages to kick out at 2, though we see immediately afterwards that the shot has busted him open. A Death Valley driver from Jay and Mark's froggy bow seem to have the match won, but Dax once again drags Jay out of the ring, breaking up the pinfall. He baits in Mark and drops him face first onto the steel steps. A blind tag from Cash allows Dax in, and they connect with the Shatter Machine to earn a hard-fought second fall. The third fall begins with bloody Cash and Mark trading hateful forearms and chops in the centre of the ring. Mark gets the better of his counterpart of an exploder, and delivers one to Dax as well. He tries for a third on the apron, before he and Dax trade chops back and forth, Mark winning the exchange and connecting with a diving blockbuster off the apron. Jay tries desperately for the J Driller, but Dax manages to fight out of it and spikes the elder Briscoe with a fantastic looking pile driver, though it's not enough to get the pin. Jay fights to get Harwood on his shoulders for the Doomsday, but Wheeler pushes Mark into a right hand from Dax. Jay battles both members of FTR before an errant right hand sends Paul Turner to the outside. The Briscoes capitalise, Jay nailing the J Driller on Dax and getting the visual pin, but with no ref to award them the third fall. The Briscoes try for the Doomsday device yet again, with Cash once more pushing Mark off the top rope to foil it. Jay once again fights off both Cash and Dax, but his attempted springboard crossbody is countered into a Shatter Machine out of nowhere. Cash retrieves the referee and he begins to count, but Jay kicks out at the last moment, which I believe is one of the first, if not the first time the Shatter Machine has been kicked out of. FTR wastes no time setting up for the powerplex, but this time it's Mark who shoves Cash off the top rope. Jay gets Dax into the electric chair once again, and the Briscoes nail the Doomsday device, but Cash breaks up the pin at the last possible moment. As Jay and Dax recover, Mark and Cash face off, before an attempted suicide suplex sends them both to the outside. Inside the ring, Dax and Jay get into a fist fight that Jay seems to win, but Dax nails a huge lariat. Jay counters his pin attempt with a crucifix for 2, before wrenching back on his head with a painful submission. Mark does the same to Cash when he re-enters, and FTR prevent themselves from tapping out before making it to the ropes. The Briscoes set up for a spike J Driller on Dax when Cash appears out of nowhere, suplexing Mark off the top rope through the table on the outside in an unreal moment. Dax tries to catch Jay off guard, but gets dropped with the J Driller, but shockingly kicks out at 2. Jay tries for it one more time, but finds himself placed on the top rope. They trade shots, but Dax manages to catch and drill Jay with a ridiculous avalanche pile driver, rolling himself and Jay over and pinning him with his feet to win the third fall and retain the titles. There's a standing ovation from the fans in attendance as FTR celebrate. Cash calls the Briscoes into the ring to allow the fans to show the appreciation they deserve, and the two teams shake hands, though it's clear there is still some animosity, and the Briscoes make their exit. This is as physical, complex and violent a 2 out of 3 falls match as you can have, one that would not have felt out of place in the slightest in mid-2000s Ring of Honor. Working a 45-minute match is incredibly difficult physically on the part of the wrestlers, but it's also a challenge to keep the fans engaged and avoid burning them out. FTR and the Briscoe brothers did a magnificent job building this match slowly, constructing a solid foundation, not doing too much too early knowing they've got 45 minutes to fill, and keeping the fans with them the whole way. The fans were into this from the beginning, but the contrast in terms of their excitement and interest at the beginning of the match compared to the end, given how much time these 4 were wrestling for, is very impressive to me. A steady, classic tag team wrestling first fall preceded the fights that were the other 2. Each was roughly 15 minutes long, but come together to be greater than the sum of their parts. I'm not normally a big fan of 2 out of 3 falls matches. You generally end up with a low stakes, unengaging second fall, since it's pretty much guaranteed that whoever lost the first fall will win the second, which robs the match of much of its tension and excitement. They made the best of it here though, I feel, pushing the match in a more physical and violent direction to differentiate itself from the first fall, getting the crowd hyped with a terrific Cash Wheeler hot tag and intense finish, a perfectly executed blind tag into the Shatter Machine. Both teams work as tag teams. Sounds obvious, but it's something I do find lacking in a lot of modern tag matches. They position themselves well, preventing their opponents from making tags, cutting off at the right times, and isolating their opponents to their own territory really effectively. You can't go wrong with classic tag team strategy, punctuated with moments of brutality and chaos. It all ties together nicely to illustrate the intensity of this rivalry. There's a steady escalation towards bigger and bigger moves. Both teams' finishing manoeuvres get pinfalls, but the arms race peaks in the third fall. The final bombs are a massive suplex through a table to the floor, and a devastating avalanche pile driver. It's a really great finish. If I'm being honest though, this is probably my least favourite match out of the 3, and I think that's mostly down to the third fall, but more specifically a few moments in it that just didn't work for me. It features a less than stellar ref bump that basically requires Dax to go out of his way to punch Paul Turner. They try to play it off as an accident, but it's unfortunately just too blatant for me to believe that Dax actually missed Jay, took 2 or 3 steps, turned, and then hit the referee. If they had played it off as Dax being frustrated, acting like it was an accident when it was deliberate, I think it could have worked. FTR have been healing it up quite a bit in this feud, and them lashing out in frustration could have added a nice wrinkle to the match. At the end of the day, it just comes down to people being out of position, and it's far from the end of the world, but I can't lie and say that it didn't take me out of the match a little bit. The other little niggle I had about this match applies to a few of the FTR tag matches. This is going to be a bit of a tangent, but I will circle back to a point about wrestling, I promise. You've probably heard the Wilhelm scream sound effect before. It sounds like this. It's a distinctive stock sound effect that's been used in hundreds of films since its first appearance in 1951, becoming something of an Easter egg to include it in films. Now there's a film you may or may not have heard of called 30 Days of Night. It's a horror film about a town in Alaska that gets besieged by vampires during a long polar night. Now about a third of the way through the film, there's a scene in which the army of vampires slaughter most of the town. It's a nasty, violent and brutal scene, and it ends with an extended shot of the bird's eye view of the carnage. Now the reason I bring it up is that there's one moment in the scene where the Wilhelm scream is used, when one of the vampires throws a man off a roof. This might just be me being overly critical or pretentious, I don't know, but when I heard it I just thought, for f***'s sake, really? You had me, I was in, I was all the way in, I was invested, I cared, and you've just whiplashed me out of it with a silly sound effect. Right now you're probably thinking, quite rightly, what the f*** are you talking about, and what could this possibly have to do with FTR and the Briscoes? Just like with the Wilhelm scream, I might be the only person who gets annoyed by this, I don't know, but I really don't like the FTR spot where both of them get caught in submissions and reach out to each other to stop themselves submitting. In a vacuum there's nothing wrong with it, and the first time I saw it against DIY, almost 10 years ago now, I thought it was great. Now though, I find it really quite grating. It felt so spontaneous and different the first time, but every time I see it now it just feels so contrived, and like the Wilhelm scream, so out of place that it legitimately takes me out of the match. This may seem like I'm making a big deal out of a relatively minor moment, which is fair, but when I rewatched the match, it was just such an obvious callback that I couldn't help but be taken out of it. If it were FTR doing the submissions, I could really get behind it. It would be a smart nod to their former rivals, trying to beat the Briscoes the same way DIY beat them in Toronto. These are just 2 small moments that sat with me, and by no means do I think they ruined the match. I think when talking about high level wrestling like this, there's just as much, if not more value looking at what doesn't work for you as what does. All that aside, it's a fantastically impressive 2 out of 3 falls match, one that acts as a great sequel to their first match, and has a finish that works as both a full stop and a question mark as to the future of their feud. That future will be revealed 5 months later. After falling short in an AEW tag title match against the Acclaimed, FTR will be given a message from the Briscoes by Austin and Colton Gunn. A Christmas card calling them out for that Saturday's Final Battle event, and a pair of dog collars. With that, the match was made. FTR vs the Briscoes for the 3rd and tragically final time. The 2 teams look incredibly determined as they make their way to the ring. FTR's trunks are adorned with the date they made their debuts in the Ring of Honor, attacking the Briscoes, Final Battle 2021, and the current date, Final Battle 2022, perhaps foreshadowing their time in Ring of Honor and their war with Mark and Jay is coming to an end. Mike Posey and Paul Turner are in the ring to attach the collars. Jay is paired up with Dax and Cash with Mark. The crowd is hyped as the bell rings, and the Briscoes waste no time, Mark tugging at the chain and Jay whipping it into Dax's face. They're at a standoff until Jay makes the first move, flying at Dax, and the two teams begin to brawl, ending up battling on the outside. Neither of their previous matches could be restricted solely to the ring either, but in those matches the time spent brawling on the outside was largely limited. That is not the case in this one. None of the four men seemingly have any intention of returning to the ring. Mark begins to bleed almost immediately, and Jay eats a chair to the face shortly after, getting sent over the barricade and into the crowd, where he and Dax continue to brawl. Cash and Mark make their way to the stage, with Mark wiping out his counterpart with a huge dive. Dax and Jay return to the ring, and while Dax briefly gets the upper hand with a pair of suplexes, Mark emerges to help his brother take the advantage. Jay lands a series of absolutely tremendous looking right hands, wrapping the chain around his fist to deal even more damage. The Briscoes remain in control, until Dax manages to send Jay headfirst into a steel chair wedged in the corner, as Cash restrains Mark from the outside. FTR beat the younger Briscoe, whipping him in the midsection with the chain. When Dax goes after Jay on the floor, we get a look at the damage that chair inflicted, the side of Jay's face completely covered in blood. Dax hoists Mark up in the electric chair, and Cash begins to wrap the chain around his forearm. FTR nail the Doomsday device, and Dax prevents Jay from interfering, but Mark manages to kick out at two. FTR only get nastier from here. Cash locks in a brutal gory special on Mark, using the chain for extra leverage. Dax lands a chain shot on the exposed Briscoe, and I love the way that Cash sells his arm afterwards, though I'm not sure if that was an artistic choice or the real response to being whipped with a chain. Cash hangs Mark outside the ring, wrenching back on the chain, while Dax restrains his brother. Jay manages to send Dax into the improvised clothesline, breaking Cash's grip and freeing his brother. Jay takes out Dax and Cash, setting up Mark for a chain-wrapped froggy bow for two. Mark drags Cash out of the ring before setting up a pile of steel chairs and a table, while Dax and Jay slug it out. A snap suplex on the floor from Mark leaves both men laying, and after battling with the chain for some time, a bloody Dax eventually lands a chain-assisted diving headbutt. All four are now heavily bleeding, and Dax intends to bust Jay open even wider. He wraps the chain around his fist, goes to town on his face, pushing away Mike Posey when he tries to check on Jay's condition. Dax continues, but is unable to stop in time when Jay pulls Mike into his path, and the referee gets clocked with the chain. He crawls to the corner, and we see a thick, dark pool beginning to form on his forehead and pour down his face. Dax briefly shows concern, but when Jay returns to his feet, it's right back to business, and they begin to trade huge shots. Jay gets the better of the Axe with a massive back suplex. Mark and Cash carry on where their partners left off on the apron, firing elbows back and forth until Cash drops Mark with a back suplex. A lariat puts the younger Briscoe on the table, and Cash prepares a diving attack. Mark intercepts him, knocking him off the apron to the floor with a big elbow and dropkicking him through the ropes for good measure. He leaves Cash on the table and climbs to the top rope, while Jay gets Dax up for the Doomsday device. Cash scrambles onto the apron and yanks Mark off the top rope, and he takes a horrific fall onto the steel chairs. Dax tries for a pile driver, and Jay reverses and lands a huge Jay driller, but Dax manages to kick out at two. He batters Dax with a steel chair and tries for the driller once again. Dax counters, connecting below the belt and spiking Jay with a pile driver, pinning him exactly the way he won the previous match, but this time Jay kicks out at the last possible moment. Dax uses a chair to steady himself, and Cash begins sliding more steel chairs into the ring. Dax tries for what would be a devastating top rope pile driver, but Jay manages to slip free, crotching Dax and knocking Cash to the floor. Jay lands an enormous superplex into the pile of chairs, and Mark and Cash engage in a tug of war as Mark tries to prevent Cash from interfering. Jay wraps the chain around Dax's neck and wrenches back, and while Dax manages to remove the chain from his neck, he's unable to get it past his face as Jay continues to pull. Cash scratches and claws to get in the ring and try and break the hold, but the strain of the chain against Dax's mouth is too much, and he passes out. With that, the incredibly bloody Briscoe brothers become 13-time Ring of Honor Tag Team Champions. After departing the ring, the Guns would attack FTR, but will be warded off shortly after by the Briscoes, who would help FTR to their feet and have their arms raised together to close out their trilogy. A total bloodbath is the only way I think this feud could really have ended, and a total bloodbath is exactly what we got here. For me, the first two matches felt stylistically more like FTR matches, but this was unquestionably a Briscoe brothers brawl. All four men seemed right at home here in this gnarly, bloody fight, but Jay Briscoe in particular, his face absolutely covered in blood, had a look on his face a few times in this match where he seemed to be completely fulfilled and content amongst the chaos. The four aren't the only ones that get in on the bloodbath. I criticised the final four of the previous match for having a terrible ref bump, but I think this match makes up for it, as Mike Posey ends up absolutely covered in blood after an inadvertent shot with the chain from Dax. It's legitimately shocking when the camera cuts back to Posey in the corner, and you see the thick crimson mask that's already formed. A pleasant surprise for sadistic fans like myself. Chaos and the positive subversion of expectations are key to this match and why I think it works so well. The table on the outside is another great example of this. Cash's setup and the repeated teases are subverted by Mark Briscoe's horrifying bump into the chairs, a gnarly payoff that far exceeds expectations. Wrestling is at its best for me when it's not clean, when it's full of imperfections, and when it looks and feels like a struggle. It's the tiny imperfections dotted throughout that make this match so special to me. Cash getting clipped by the chain while he has Mark in the gory special is a perfect example. He acknowledges and sells the connection briefly, clearly irritated, but getting winged like that isn't going to stop him, and it barely slows him down. The brawl that begins the match as the two pairs separate off is the sort of chaotic wrestling I love. Clearly no spots planned out, no contrivances to speak of, just guys adapting to their surroundings and making the most of their predicaments at all times to inflict damage on their opponents. It's sloppy and raw in the best possible ways, and while I love the more strategic and cerebral stylings of the previous matches, the first in particular, this sort of gritty, unrelenting fight to me is everything I could have wanted from an FTR Briscoes match. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that this is among the very best dog collar matches of all time. You'd be forgiven for thinking that the dog collar match at that year's Revolution event would have been the best of the year, but I think this match clears it comfortably. The danger of a match like this, with so many moving parts and two chains to work around, is that it can be overbooked. That was not the case here. The two teams use the dog collars incredibly well, with some simple but nasty and effective use of the chains as weapons, as well as some more intricate spots with them. Jay sending Dax into the taut chain to save Mark from being choked comes to mind. It's executed wonderfully, and doesn't feel contrived in the slightest. I think the ending of the match is just phenomenal. A huge superplex into the chairs precedes Jay locking Dax in submission in the centre of the ring, wrapping the chain across Dax's face. Cash frantically tries to make the save, with Mark yanking Cash back to prevent him from doing so. I criticised the FTR double submission spot in the previous match, as I felt it was glaringly obvious in its contrivance. This spot though, I just love it. Cash hurling Mark to the floor earlier comes back to bite him, and both men sell their desperation here brilliantly. I'm really sick of people passing out rather than tapping out into submissions, as I think it's become far too prevalent and often doesn't make sense, and I think the visual of someone physically tapping out is generally more effective. There's no shame in tapping out, and not everyone needs to be portrayed as so tough they pass out rather than submit. In this case, I think it's fine. Between Dax's blood loss and the fact that this was the end of such an intense feud, I can accept it. And while I do think him tapping out would have gotten a better reaction from the fans, complaining about it would be an extreme nitpick, even by my standards. All four men give this match their all, a perfect ending to their feud, and as great a Ring of Honor send-off as FTR, and unfortunately in hindsight Jay Briscoe, could ask for. A little over a month after this match, Jay Briscoe would pass away, at the age of 38, a tragic loss for his family, and one that devastated the wrestling world. After Jay's passing, Mark would make his first official AEW appearance, wrestling longtime friend Jay Leaf in the main event of Dynamite, in a beautiful tribute match, with it being announced that Mark would be a full-time member of the AEW roster going forward. He would vacate the Ring of Honor Tag Team titles, and would unsuccessfully challenge Samoa Joe for the Ring of Honor Television title at Supercard of Honor 2023, as well as being part of the inaugural Continental Classic, during which he would team up with rivals FTR to take on the Blackpool Combat Club's Jon Moxley, Claudio Castagnoli and Bryan Danielson, in a fight to honour Jay Briscoe. I won't be covering that match in this video. However, if you'd like to see my review and analysis of this match, the extended cut of this episode is available on Patreon. There's also some free short essays and blog posts over there right now. There's all the things the character limit on Twitter prevents me from writing. So if you do enjoy my work, check out the Patreon, because there's some more free stuff you'll enjoy. And if you'd like to support the channel and get even more good stuff in the process, feel free to join as a paid member. There are links down below. The pride and ego that began this war between the two teams at Final Battle 2021 ended as something much bigger. A shared legacy between four men who believe in the same values and share such a love of tag team wrestling. This trilogy is tremendous. The entire spectrum of tag team wrestling condensed into 3 matches. It's evocative, gritty, and real. The intensity never wanes or falters. Every match ends at least somewhat respectfully, but every time they get back in the ring, this shared animosity immediately returns. FTR and the Briscoes are yin and yang, 2 sides of the same coin, 2 apex predators in the world of tag team wrestling. They can't help but fight one another. When I saw these matches for the first time, I distinctly remember thinking that these 2 teams were destined to do this forever. If not for the loss of Jay, I'm positive that they would have. Prior to these matches, I'd always thought FTR to be somewhat overrated as a tag team. I'd always enjoyed their style and their philosophy, particularly the contrast it creates with other modern tag teams, and I'd really enjoyed some of their matches, but I never saw them as being in the greatest tag team of all time territory, like many people did. This will sound harsh, but prior to these matches, I had thought that FTR had been coasting to an extent on their great NXT matches with DIY and American Alpha. Their run in AEW was not bad by any stretch, but for me at least, it never felt like I was seeing the untethered, fully evolved version of the Revival that I'd expected. To be fair, I don't think this was entirely their fault. I think they'd been miscast as a babyface team for much of their run in AEW, particularly Dax, who as a face I've always found to be inauthentic and unlikable. As tweeners or ideally full heels, I think the pair are tremendous, shutting down offense, cutting off the ring, and leaning into the self-righteousness and arrogance of their reverence for tag team wrestling. I love the way they lean into that heelishness throughout this trilogy, as do the Briscoes. It allows the matches to transcend heel and face archetypes, and becomes a heated, hateful grudge match about respect, rather than morality. The trilogy showed FTR at their best. Much like Mark and Jay, they wrestle like a team of complete, unwavering trust in one another, talking in the ring like real teammates would, being an authentic and believable tag team in an era where authenticity is often in short supply. For a team that spent much of their career paying tribute to old school tag team wrestling, I think this series is what they'll be remembered for. These matches being the ones that solidified their place in tag team wrestling history for decades to come. When people talk about the best opponents for FTR, I think the Briscoes should be at the top of that list. I've long believed that the Briscoes may be the best utility tag team in modern wrestling. Having rewatched these matches again, I'm even more convinced. Mark and Jay could do it all, and did. Any type of match, technical wrestling, multi-man scrambles, brawls, plunder matches, the Briscoes would slot in seamlessly. Whether the pair are working as heels or babyfaces, or anything in between, they're totally believable and entirely committed, and their evolution, from more athletic and fast-paced junior heavyweight style matches, to a much heavier brawling style, while still retaining their explosivity, is a real treat if you compare their earlier work to the latter part of their run. They weren't cosmetically pleasing enough for a certain sports entertainment company, but they got their biggest break as a tag team here, and absolutely made the most of it, putting on some of the most compelling and raw matches of their careers. Everything ends, but as endings go, you couldn't ask for much more for the last Ring of Honor matches of the Briscoes. I think these 4 are made for each other, and while we only got 3 matches between the 2 teams, the fact that we got 1 dream match encounter, let alone 3, is something that I think as wrestling fans, we should be massively grateful for. I watched this series for the 3rd time while I was writing this video, the 2nd time I've seen these matches since Jay passed away. I find it hugely bittersweet going back and rewatching these matches, knowing that this is the closest we'd ever get to seeing the Briscoes compete on television for a major international promotion. Ring of Honor's television never saw huge viewership, and their work for New Japan would only ever be seen internationally on New Japan World. Hardcore fans had obviously followed their work for decades, but these matches with FTR were the Briscoes' most significant mainstream bouts, immediately putting them in front of more casual fans that were seeing them for the first time. I'm so glad these matches delivered to the level that they did. As you can see in real time, fans buying into them, a team hardcore fans have been praising as among the best in the world for so many years. Jay's passing at such a young age would always be a tragedy, and it hurts all the more that he passed right as it seemed the Briscoes would finally get a shot in AEW. Anyone who's watched even a single Briscoes match knows how terrific a full-time AEW run would have been. Watching Mark Briscoe wrestle longtime friend Jay Lethal in the main event of Dynamite brought tears to my eyes, and I'm so glad for the success that Mark has had since. To a better wrestler, and by all accounts a better man, it couldn't happen. I think fans of Jay Briscoe can take a lot of comfort in the fact that the last year of his career saw him compete at the absolute highest level, going out swinging in 3 of the best matches of his career, FTR and the Briscoes' careers, and of the entire 21st century. Top 5 Dead or Alive, forever. Of the matches that I spoke about in this video, my top recommendation would be the double dog collar match from Final Battle 2022, but I encourage you to seek out and watch all three. I think they come together as one of the absolute best trilogies of the last 20 years, and maybe of all time too. Thank you for watching this episode of WrestleLore. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, be sure to like and subscribe for more videos like it, and comment your thoughts below. Let me know how you'd rank the trilogy, or your thoughts on FTR and the Briscoes in general. In the next episode, we're going to be talking about another great trilogy, as the heart of the UWFI took on arguably the greatest super heavyweight of all time, in 3 hard-hitting matches across 3 years. Thanks again for watching, follow me on Twitter for updates, and I'll see you later. Cheers.